Okay, hopefully you can see my slide.
Yep, you're good to go. Enjoy the webinar, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Hi, I'm Kathy Kellenberger. I'm a senior consultant with Pragmatic Works. I'm also a SQL Server MVP. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the changes in SSIS, starting with 2012. These changes also apply to 2014. There's really not much new in 2014 with SSIS. Right offhand, I know of one thing that I'll mention when we get to that point. I have a blog at kathysql.com, and I have a lot of posts about T-SQL, SSIS. I have some on reporting services, all the things that are near and dear to my heart. So be sure to check those out. There's also a post that is just dedicated to what's new with SSIS, and so it's kind of a summary about what I'm going to be talking about today. So it's kind of funny, as the slides were going through with the upcoming webinars, there was one from Robert Kane that said, forget everything that you know about SSIS because everything's changed in 2012. And I thought that was kind of funny because I usually start this presentation off saying, hey, don't forget what you've learned in the past. There's not a steep learning curve to get to 2012, and that's what this slide's about. There's not a steep learning curve. You can take your existing skills from SSIS 2005 through 2008 R2 and apply those directly to 2012. There are some new things, but for the most part, it's going to be very familiar territory. It's not a big, scary undertaking like moving from DTS to SSIS was. And if you have a bunch of DTS packages still out there, be sure to give Pragmatic Works a call, because we can definitely help you get that mountain of DTS packages down to a little well, I should say get to a wonderful mountain of SSIS packages. We can help you with that. So here's the last slide in this whole deck. Basically, the rest of the presentation will be demos, complete demos. When I thought about what's new in SSIS, I realized that there were several categories that they fell into. Some are cosmetic. They don't really make a difference. They're more about the look and feel. Some are convenient. They really make your life easier, but they're not earth-shattering. There's a few changes in development, not a lot there, which, well, I guess that's okay. There's a lot you can do already with SSIS. There's some things that make troubleshooting and logging easier. Deployment is the biggest change, and if you go back and look at the webinars, previously recorded webinars, I had a session just on the deployment a couple of months ago. I can easily talk for an hour or more just on that topic. There's also a link on this slide. I'd like you to go ahead and note that link. Basically, this is how you can download the SSDT, the SQL Server Data Tools, for your development. And the reason that I'm giving a link instead of just saying go out and use your CD, your DVD that SQL Server came with, starting with 2014, you can't even find SQL Server Data Tools there. You've got to go out and download it. The other interesting thing is that there are multiple downloads depending on which version of Visual Studio you're using. So I remember in the past needing one version of Visual Studio for my .NET development and then another version of Visual Studio for my SSRS and SSIS development, and that kind of drove me a bit crazy trying to have those work together sometimes there were incompatibilities. I think at one point I ended up just using 2 laptops instead of 1 because it was driving me so crazy. So there are more choices now. So that's, make sure you note down that link, and then you can install whichever version that you need. And if you're using 2014, you have to go out and do a download. So that's it for the slides. Let's go ahead and start with some actual demos. So the first thing that is really different, and I've already kind of alluded to that, is that we no longer have bids. It's no longer called bids, BI Development Studio. That is kind of a cosmetic change. Things are not going to, nothing that you do is going to matter whether we call it bids or whether we call it SSDT for SQL Server data tools. I would say this is not something I'm happy about. I like the acronym bids. Plus there's a lot of confusion out there because SSDT can mean more than one thing. So if you go out and look for a link to download SSDT, you have to be very careful that you don't accidentally download the wrong thing. Make sure that if you go out and do a search that you're looking for SSDT BI in order to get the right tool. So this is not something I'm happy about. It's more of a cosmetic change. It doesn't affect how I work. It really affects how I talk or how I write articles or give presentations about this. It's hard for me to remember to say SSDT. So if you catch me saying bids, it's probably going to take me a couple years to get used to not saying that. So please forgive me for that. You'll notice just looking at this that it looks different. Another interesting thing is that it also looks different depending on which version of Visual Studio I'm using. At the current customer where I'm working, I'm using Visual Studio 2012, I believe, and I think this one is Visual Studio 2010. Let me double check that. 2010. If you are using the 2012, everything has like a Metro look to it, like the Windows 8 look to it, but there's no colors. Everything is one color, and I really have issues with that. It's very difficult for me to see what I'm doing. I was able to download a different, I guess like not really a template, but kind of like a style for it that helped a little bit, but generally I would much prefer working in this environment where I can actually see what I'm doing a little better. I noticed that as soon as the new version, as soon as there was a version compatible with the Visual Studio 2012, all the cool folks were out there using the new one. I don't know if I'm just not that cool, or maybe it's something with my eyes, but it's very difficult for me, and I prefer this interface. I haven't taken a look at the 2013 yet, so it's possible that I'll like that one better. So I'm going to give the demo in this version just because it helps my eyes a little bit. So one of the things that was kind of funny when SQL Server 2012 was first announced at the PASS Summit a few years ago. This is before it was released. There was a joke by the presenters that they had an entire team or some people dedicated just to getting these rounded corners. You know, that was supposed to be a joke. This is a difference. It looks different. Does it make any difference in how I work? It makes zero difference in how I work. You'll notice that a lot of the icons do look different. You know, it's just a matter of getting used to those. One thing that's kind of interesting, I'm going to go ahead and just execute this container. One thing that's kind of interesting is the icons for status are very different. So now I have these little swirlies. Hopefully you saw that before it turned green. It used to be that more of the task itself would light up. And now it's just these little icons in the corner. Again, you may or may not like that. It doesn't really affect how you work. If I double click and go into a data flow, one interesting difference, and hopefully you can see it, is just the color. It used to be the normal path going through was green, and then if you had any error rows, they could go into a red error path. For some reason, they made this blue. I really don't know why. In the control flow, you still have green. Let's see what else. The other thing that's kind of a cosmetic change, I mean, I don't know where else to put this, is the toolbox. It's definitely something I am not thrilled with, and trust me, this gets better. I get past the things I don't like first, and then I talk about the things I do like. So this really threw me whenever SSIS first came out. If I would come up and go to View Toolbox, I would get a toolbox with nothing in it. And that was kind of embarrassing. Before I realized what was going on, I was demoing this to customers. I was working at Microsoft at the time. I was demoing to customers. This is while we were still in the CTP releases, and I didn't understand that there were two different toolboxes. So sometimes I would get the right toolbox and sometimes I wouldn't, and you know, it was kind of an embarrassing thing. Anyway, we have this new toolbox that's specific for SSIS. And the way I turn this on, I have not seen it in the View menu, maybe it's there. I can right-click and find it in this context menu. There's also this little icon over here that I can use to toggle it off and on. So I can, I guess I can't toggle it off. I can turn it on by clicking there. So the difference between this and the old general purpose toolbox is they have these different sections. You have some favorites, and by default you have the data flow task and the execute SQL task, and you can move. So for some reason I use the bulk insert task a lot. I can move it to this favorites area. So I have some common task. Evidently they have decided that I am going to use these commonly, and here I've got a third-party set of tasks, Task Factory in there, containers, so that makes sense, and other tasks. So things that supposedly you would not use as often. Again, I've been working with this all year. I still struggle. If I'm building a new package, I forget where to find the tasks. If I go to the data flow, it's the same thing. I have favorites, I have common, I have other transforms, other sources, other destinations. It drives me a little nuts. I don't know where to find the things that I need. So I'm not really a big fan of that change. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next set of changes. Things get much better. The cosmetic ones, as you can tell, I'm not a fan. But from now on, everything I talk about is pretty cool. So if I take a look at another package over here, I've got one called Convenience. And there's quite a few things that are very helpful. The first thing is, imagine that you open up a package and for some reason the server that you're pointing to is down, or a database that you need is offline. Generally, you're going to sit there, at least in my experience, sit there and wait while the package tries to connect to those, and it's just really, really frustrating. Zoom in a little bit down here so you can see this particular connection manager is offline, but I didn't have to wait. My package opened immediately, and instead of trying to connect and just sitting there like things are hung up, it just basically gave me the status of what's going on. So I can go ahead and work if I need to, or go ahead and fix that problem. So let me go ahead and fix the problem. What it is I have a database that is offline. Okay, so let me bring this database back online. And when I go back to my package, I can right-click and test the connectivity, and everything is now fine. So that is something that's very convenient. It was a problem that didn't stop me from working in the past, kind of delayed me from working. The next thing, and you'll hear me talk a lot about this throughout the session, is that we have project connection managers, and we also have package connection managers. In this new environment, we have to start thinking a lot about whether something is at the package level or at the project level, and this is the first thing. So basically, I can create connection managers at this project level. When I do that, all of these are automatically inherited at the package. So I've got 3 different connection managers here. And if I create a brand new package, package 2, you'll see that I automatically got all 3 of those as connection managers in my package. If I create a brand new one up here, it will automatically show up in all my packages. I could even change my mind. If down the road I had a connection manager in a package and I wanted to change it to a project, I can just right-click and convert it to a package connection. So that's very convenient. And what I would like you to do is, when you have to decide, well, where do I want to create my connection manager? Do I want to create it at the package? Do I want to create it at the project? So if it's something that you're going to be using in multiple packages, go ahead and create it at the project level. If it's something special, for example, maybe a text file that's only used with one package, well, then you probably want to create that at the package level. So it's, really all about scope. The next thing I want to show you, I have actually gotten applause at user group meetings when I have shown this. Let's say that I accidentally delete something. In the past, I had really 2 choices. Number one, I could close my package out and say I don't want to save it, and then go back in and it'll be at the state where it was at the previous save. Or my second choice would be just to recreate that task or data flow or whatever it was. Basically, when it's gone, it's gone. Luckily, to me this is almost like a bug fix. I don't understand why, since 2005 there hasn't been an undo and a redo. So all I have to do now is just click undo, and I also have redo. So it's pretty crazy that in this day and age, this is 2014, that I will get applause during user group meetings when I present this, just on this little feature. It's pretty crazy. We put up with a lot. The other thing that drove me nuts is copy and paste. I can, previously I could copy a task or a transform, and then I can paste it. Where does that object go? And I'm not really, this is not a hypothetical question. Really, where does that object go? In the past, it would probably not show up in the viewable screen. I would have to scan around and look for that object. I don't know why it would work this way. It seems to me like it would be more difficult to program it for that behavior than the behavior that we all expect. So now, when I copy and paste something, it goes right where my cursor is. Imagine that. Imagine us putting up with this for so many years. So that is a great thing. Here's another thing that drove me crazy. So last year, I spent the entire year working with SSIS, SSIS 2008 R2. The entire year, I was at one customer. And there were some very complex data flows, very, very complex. In these data flows, there would be a lot of, error paths coming off. It would not be unusual to have 5 or 10 error paths coming off, and then eventually all of those error paths joining back together with a union all. It worked. Everything was fine. And a lot of what I did on this for this customer is track down bugs. I'm pretty good at that. Track down bugs. Some of these bugs had been there forever. Add new features, those types of things. There were not a lot of packages that I created from scratch. I was somebody who came in maybe 6 months, a couple years after the package was created and added new features or fixed things. So every time that I was told that we need this new column in this fact table, I would just I would instantly get a headache, because I knew that as soon as I touched my data source, my data flow would light up like a Christmas tree. As soon as I touched that data source, I would start seeing red error symbols all over the entire thing, because if you touch that data source, everything downstream is affected. So, I mean, I bit the bullet, I did the job, but I would always, cringe a little bit, maybe have to take some ibuprofen, but because I knew just what was going to happen. So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I look at this, I have a union all, and I have a couple of columns coming in from these two data sources. I like using union all for demonstrating things, because even though it's kind of like a dead end you can use as a demonstration, you don't really have to go anywhere after it. So what would happen if I would change my column name? So you immediately see I get my little error symbol. If this was a complicated data flow, I'd be getting error symbols all over the place. To fix this, I usually would bang my head against the desk. It's usually what I would do. If I would go into my union all, I would get that screen that said, sorry, things are no longer working. Do you want to get rid of everything? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? A bunch of different choices that I really didn't understand. But believe me, after working with that for a year, I did eventually get it, figure it all out. So the problem is, all I need to do is really do this. But it was so painful and difficult to do before. See how easy that was? The other thing that I can do if there's a problem, let me go ahead and change this back. I can also right-click, resolve references, and just by dragging and dropping, fix the problem. So, I mean, to me, that's worth the price of admission right there. Let's talk about variables. There were a few little things with variables that were not that great. Variables are great, but there were a few little things that were kind of a pain. So if I right-click and bring up the variables window, I can add a new variable and, you know, give it a data type and, you know, and a value. The thing is, the biggest thing about variables is that sometimes you accidentally add them at the wrong scope. And then, for me, what would usually happen is I would lose the variable. I wouldn't be able to find it again. So there is a new feature called Move Variable. When I click that, I can move my variable to any other scope that I would like to move it to. Well, the problem is it's still disappearing. I don't know, maybe there was something like this in the previous versions. I'm not really sure, but all I have to do now is show the variables of all scope, and now I can see all those variables. So that's really handy. Another cool thing is that in the past, if I had an expression on a particular variable or anywhere, sometimes I would forget that. And now there is a new little symbol that automatically pops up. So if I give this expression, hello world, in quote, I now get a little expression symbol on my variable, or really any of my tasks or connection managers. So that's pretty nice. Let's see. There's a few more little things. One is that there's actually a new XML format that is easier. Let's see, view code. That's easier to read, easier to use with tools that can compare different files. So this format is different. I believe I have only had to mess with the XML file maybe one time in my career, where I've actually gone in and edited the actual XML of an SSIS package. Usually I don't care about that much, but if you do want to use a tool to compare the differences, it should work a lot better. Okay, let's talk about development. There's not a lot new in development. There are some new tasks. For example, there's a whole set of tasks and transforms around change data capture. There's also, and I don't believe I have them installed, there's also change data capture for Oracle. That's something that you could purchase separately from a company called Attunity in the past. Now it comes with SSIS, probably only Enterprise Edition, if I remember correctly. There's new tasks for things like data mining. Generally, your tasks are going to work the same. There's one new task that I really, really love called the expression task. So back in the DTS days, there was something like this where I could just assign a value to a variable. Starting with SSIS 2005, I have lots of ways I can work with variables. For example, with expressions, with you know, I could save something from a query into a variable. There's a lot of different ways. Every once in a while, I would run into a situation where none of those ways would work, and I would have to use a script task to assign my variable, which seems like a lot of overkill for just assigning a value for a variable, right? I mean, it's okay to do, but it just seemed like overkill. So now we have this handy-dandy expression task, and all I have to do is drag down my, that might be different I don't know if I've still got that variable. Yeah, I still have it. Okay, so all I have to do is drag down my variable and set up some kind of expression. You know, when I've got my functions and operators, everything I would normally have. And this is just so much easier than setting up a script task. The other thing that is really a big deal with development is this missing column feature. So imagine that I have, oh, I wish I had this set up already. I can use this assistant. Yeah, there's like these little wizards that help you get started. Okay, so let me browse and create a connection manager. And actually, I don't have my file yet. I think I'm starting this backwards. Let me start with the file first. Let's say I have a file that I want to import using SSIS. And the file looks something like this: column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5. Okay, so far so good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. 1, 5. 1, 4. So what if my file looks something like this, where I have incomplete data? The only row that's really got everything it needs is this row right here. So let me just save that and go back to SSIS, and I'm going to use this. So this is another thing for development. If you're not really sure how to get started with your source and destination, you can use these little assistants, kind of like a wizard, to help you get going. Okay, let me go ahead and browse to that file. Now in the past, this would probably blow up. You'd have to do something like import the file maybe as one field and then parse it out, something like that. But notice that the connection manager is happy. It does not care that I'm missing pieces of information. It still works. So that's a pretty nice new feature for development. That's really pretty much it. There's a few other things. For example, there's some changes with the pivot transform. I could probably do a half hour just on that. I have used the pivot transform last year, pivot and unpivot. I found them very difficult to understand. And the new, I can't remember if we both have a pivot and unpivot, but the new are still kind of weird. I'm still not a fan, but I can always do that in T-SQL as well. So that might be what I want to do instead. Okay, let's talk about deployment. This is the area where you pretty much have to just start thinking in a whole new way. Deployment is very, very different. Luckily, it's all good. It's really some good things. If you're a fan of Jamie Thompson, he has he's always a step ahead on SSIS, and he's created frameworks. There's some other folks such as Andy Leonard, Jessica Moss, some people who have worked with frameworks in SSIS to kind of help with deployment and some other things. What it really looks like is that Microsoft has copied what these folks have done. And so now we get it, we just give it given to us without a lot of work. So the first thing I want to talk about is the new way that we deploy is really, really different. We have a new folder in Management Studio called Integration Services Catalogs. And we still have this connect to integration services up here, but that's really more for backwards compatibility. If you're going to still use the old way of deployment, that's what this is still in place for. And in fact, you might, when you do your upgrade, you might think about doing things in two steps. Let's first get everything moved to 2012, and then after you get everything working, now let's think about how to deploy in the new world of SSIS. You might come up with a plan like that. So the first thing that I need to do is right-click. Let me refresh that. Right-click and create catalog. And this dialog comes up. You have to enable CLR. This works with CLR. I've already created my catalog a dozen times because I've demonstrated this so often, so that's why this is already grayed out. I'm going to be creating a database, and I don't know if I can't even change that name, and I need to supply a, let me try that again. Supply a password. This password is for encryption. Make sure you back that up. But basically what this is doing is setting encryption up for you so you don't have to do it yourself. I like that a lot. I am not, setting up encryption is not one of my favorite things to do at all. I'll click OK. And when I do, I have this section ready to work. I also have a new database called SSIS-DB, so it will automatically create this database for you. The cool thing about this database is that you can go in here. It's really not a very, it doesn't have a lot of tables. It's pretty easy to work with, and there's also some views set up for you. You can go in here and reverse engineer and create your own reports, or whatever you want to do. Of course, Jamie Thompson has out on CodePlex a set of reports that you can download already. And there's also some built-in reports that I'll show you when we get to that point. So I really like this. I like that everything is in one place, and it's easy for me to reverse engineer. Like that a lot. Okay, so I have this integration. Let me just go ahead and do this, and I can create a folder, and let's just call it SSIS session. So I can create a folder. Let's close that up. There's my folder. And now I have a place for projects and a place for environments. So I'm set up and I'm ready to start deploying my packages. So let's go back to Visual Studio and take a look at a package that we're going to run just to see how some of this works. So really the next thing I need to talk about is parameters. Just like connection managers, parameters can be defined at the package level or at the project level. And again, where you create a parameter depends on where you're going to need to use it. Am I going to use it only in a particular package, or am I going to use it in multiple packages? So you might be thinking, well, what is a parameter? It's kind of like the model where you have a master package and child packages. Where in the master package we have a variable that we pass a value to the child packages. It's exactly that same idea. So what really it amounts to is that in the past I had variables, and I could do all these different things with variables, and I could pass a variable from one package to another. A variable is going to be, you can modify a variable, do whatever I need to do with it. So the difference here is that inside my package, a variable works the same as it always has. A variable is a variable. It lives inside my package. I can change it. I can use it. It's mine. A parameter is something that while inside my package, I can see a parameter. However, inside my package, that parameter is read-only. It's more of like a scoping issue. A parameter lives outside the package. My package can see it and use it. A variable lives inside the package. I can change it, modify it. So it's kind of that idea. And the interesting thing is that by using any of the tools that I use for variables, I can also use with parameters. So if I look at this, you'll see that this folder here says variables and parameters. So when I expand this, I see my variable, but I also see that I have some parameters, and I can see the scope. It starts with the $, and then either package or project, and then the name. So if I want to use a parameter down here, I can put my parameter on the right side but not the left side. I can't change the value. So this particular package has a variable called str command, and it's just basically an insert statement, and I have several parameters set up, integer and a string at the package level, and an integer and a string at the project level. So what I'm doing in each case is I'm running that command. It's just a SQL insert statement. At each step of the way, I'm changing my command by using the parameters and then running it again. So this is my default variable. This is when I change it to use package parameters, and this is where I change it to use project parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and run this package. And it ran. And when I go back over to Management Studio, I can see that the package ran, and I can see how the value changed depending on the value of my variable as it went through. Okay, so that's how parameters work. Inside my package, I can see the parameter. So when I run my package, that's where I'm going to assign values to the parameters. In my run, however I'm running my package, that's how I'm going to do it. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we actually do deploy. For every project, I have to decide whether or not it's going to be a project deployment model or it's going to be at the package deployment model. And I can easily convert back and forth as long as I haven't used any of the new features, basically parameters. So I cannot convert this back, even though I have this choice, I can't do it because I've got parameters. If there were no parameters, I could convert back and forth. Let me go ahead and choose deploy, and I get this wizard, and there's only a couple of questions that I have to know. First of all, where do I want to deploy? Where's my server? So it's localhost. It remembered from a previous time when I ran this, so that's why it filled this in by default, and I've got an error message. So I can go ahead and click this and choose the correct path for how I have it set up today. That's all I have to know. I can review this, and I may want to copy this, because this is, if I decided I wanted to run it from command line, here's my parameters for doing that. But otherwise, I can review this screen and then go ahead and deploy. It's really, really simple. And I'll close. So now when I go back out to my integration services catalogs, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and now I see my projects and my packages are all in place. Another thing that I can do, let's see, documents, presentations, if I go drill down, I can find this ISPack file. That's all I need to deploy this package. So if I'm the developer and somebody else is actually going to deploy, all I have to do is send them this file and they can deploy it. And basically it's just the same kind of idea. You double click this, a wizard starts up, it looks just like the wizard that I just worked with. The other thing, I'm getting really short on time, the other thing is that you can have these different environments. So I can create several environments for my packages. And then what I can do is I can go in here and set up variables I don't remember if this one was, I can set up variables that I can then map to the parameters. So that's the idea. I set up these environments, those then map to the parameters of my packages. So that's how that actually works. I can go in here at the project level and I can say which environment do I want to work with. And then I can come in here and I can say, well, let me go ahead and map that variable from the environment to the package. Let me go ahead and run, yeah, that's the right one, run this, because and for some reason, even though I've already mapped it, once I've done that, it wants me to map it again if I'm running manually. Let's just, if I click the environment, I can choose which environment and it'll automatically map. I'm going to click script, then I'm also going to click OK here. So what this is telling me is that this is operation 2. every time a package runs, we get a unique operation ID. And that's how you can trace it within the database. Let me say no. Here's another really cool thing. If you want to run an SSIS package from T-SQL, in the past you had to use command shell, XP command shell, along with DTexec. Now we have actual T-SQL for running the packages. So there's several steps. You get your execution ID, set parameters, and then finally execute. So let me just go ahead and execute it from here as well. And the return value is that execution ID. So now the package is ran a couple times. Let me just come over here and run this again, and you can see here I've actually gotten the value from my dev environment. Okay. So without doing any work, my package has no logging set up whatsoever except for this logging. Okay. I have not set up any of the logging that you would typically do with SSIS. By default, you automatically get logging. It's automatically set at the best level. So if I right-click here and go to Reports, Standard Reports, I will see a dashboard where I can click in and drill down and look at information about my package. I can get error messages, I can get information about performance. It's actually really, really nice. I can see that maybe my package is running slower over time, or I can grab error messages, that type of thing. Again, these are the built-in reports that you get, and you automatically get logging without doing a thing, without lifting a finger. I get logging. You can also go out to CodePlex and download a set of reports to augment these. Some reports that a really smart guy went out and said, hey, this is what Microsoft did, I can make this even better. Another interesting thing, let me show you the properties here. There are properties of my project. Let me not look at, not the project, at the entire catalog itself, where I can say, do I want those logs cleared out periodically? How long do I want to save them? How do I want my logging set up? So there's basic logging, which you get by default, and there's also some other levels of logging. So you can look into those on your own if you're interested. 99.99% of the time, basic logging will get you what you need to see. Let's see, let me think of what else. There's another really, really cool feature called data taps. And out on my blog, I have a couple of posts about data taps. So basically, if I'm in my, let me go to one that's got a data flow. If I'm in my data flow, I can right-click and enable the data viewer. Previously, it was about 5 or 6 clicks. Now it's just a right-click and select. If I'm troubleshooting, I love using data viewers. Let's say I have several transforms and I have a problem. My data doesn't look quite right. I can add some data viewers and I can look at the data as it moves through the data flow. But I can only do that while I'm in design mode. I can't do that whenever my project's deployed. So what I can do is set up what's called a data tab. And it would take way too long to demonstrate here. It's actually, what it actually does is instead of having a viewer pop up, it actually exports that data, how it looks at any particular connection, and dumps it out to a file for troubleshooting purposes. It's not something that you'd want to do all the time, but it is something, let's say you've got a problem and for some reason you can't figure it out in design mode, it's only happening in production. And you could set this data tab up and, you know, just go ahead and troubleshoot from there. One more thing I'm going to show you, and then I think I'll have to stop, because I'm sure there's some questions. If I right-click on my project, I can go to versions, and I can see I've only got one version here. Let me deploy this again really quickly. The question I always get, can I just deploy one package? No. If you are in the project deployment model, you have to deploy the entire thing. It's a unit. Not the old way you can. The new way, no, you've got to deploy it as a unit. Everything is together. If I right-click and go to versions, I can see previous versions of my packages, and I could actually restore to selected version. This is kind of cool. This is not a backup method, but for troubleshooting purposes in a dev environment, this is a pretty cool thing. So that's really, I mean, I could go on and talk for another hour. You've seen the high points, at least the high points that I think. So if there's any questions, I can go ahead and take a few of those now. What I always do is after these sessions, I always go back out and create a blog post. Let's see. There's my blog address. So by the end of the week, I'll have a blog post answering all the questions, and there's also a post out there that is kind of a summary of what I talked about today. So I don't know if Liz can hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Are there any questions we can talk about in 3 minutes? Or?
There's several questions, so I'll just start from the top and we'll get through what we can, and then the rest we'll have you post to your blog.
Okay.
First question, can we develop SSIS packages using only SSMS in 2012, or are we forced to use SSDT?
You still have to use SSDT.
Okay. Is there a limit on the number of packages in a project?
I do not know the answer to that. There probably is. I don't know what that number would be. I've actually worked, this was not 2012, but I've actually worked on for a customer that had a project that had over 500 packages in it. So if there is a limit, I would say you probably want to stay away from that. It makes sense to me to have things broken down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Can you recover a deleted project?
A deleted project? You mean from Management Studio? I don't know. I don't know that you can. I would say probably no. If you had backups of your SQL Server database, maybe you could do it that way. So when I'm in here, I believe everything is stored in this database. So theoretically, you could probably do a restore here and get them back, but otherwise I would say no, and that's a really great reason to be using source control. Everybody should be using some kind of source control, so if you do delete something accidentally, you can always get it back.
I think we're out of time, so I'll make sure
Okay.
to get these questions to Kathy so she can get them on her blog by the end of the week.
Thanks everybody for attending today, and I hope that you are now looking forward to using SQL Server 2012, at least the SSIS part.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the webinar.